Hello, dear learners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you are during this time of the pandemic. I hope you're okay. So, this is our module 5B, which is Neo-Behaviorism. But before we dive into what is Neo-Behaviorism, let's have a recap of what we have discussed in your module 5A, which is the behaviorism. So we have discussed, of course, Pavlov's classical conditioning. I hope you can still remember about the dog and how he conditioned it to salivate, even not because of seeing the meat, but because of seeing the bell. Of course, we also talked about Skinner's operant conditioning, or where we have presented the Skinner box. And we have also differentiated classical conditioning to that of the operant conditioning. We also have talked about John Watson and Edward Lee Thorndike's connectionism. So those are for behaviorism. Now, let's talk about neo-behaviorism. What is neo-behaviorism? Neo-behaviorism, as it says here, it bridges the gap between behaviorism and cognitive theories of learning. As if you can remember, in uh, in the behaviorism, it is not they do not recognize the mind. They just recognize the outside development of an individual. For neo-behaviorism, it bridges the gap between behaviorism, which is the outside, and the cognitive theories, which we will be discussing afterwards in the next modules. Further, we will be discussing about two neo-behaviorists. We will be seeing in here how um, how taking a maze is different um, for taking the first and then repeating it the second time. So let's have first Edward Tolman. Who is Edward Tolman? Edward Tolman is born in Newton, Massachusetts in 1886. He earned his bachelor's degree in 1911. How old is he in that time? And then in 1911, also he enrolled in Harvard Graduate School and he earned his master's degree. In 1912, he went to Germany here to for his doctorate degree. And then in 1915, he earned his doctorate degree in Harvard University. Imagine. And then in 1915, of course, as a doctor in education, uh, doctor of philosophy rather, he started teaching at the Northwestern University, and in 1918, he was dismissed from the Northwestern and began teaching at the University of Berkeley. So that is a short introduction of who Edward C. Tolman is. Of course, these are other um, timelines of Edward Tolman. He in 1923 he began his experiments about this, which we will be discussing later on in your further modules. And then here his experiments on the rat, and then he also became a part of the American Psychological Association. And then in 1959 is of course death. Now, what is the theory of Edward C. Tolman? Um, his theory is purposive behaviorism, or also known as the sign learning theory. This sought to demonstrate that insight was not restricted to the evolutionary capabilities of the apes. Um, he believed individuals do more than merely respond to stimuli. They act on beliefs, attitudes, changing conditions, and they strive towards goals. Aside from, um, in contrast to behaviorism, specifically to conditioning, Tolman believed that learners do not just respond to stimuli like the dog. It does not salivate. It does not only salivate. But in here, Tolman believes that individuals do more than merely responding to stimuli. They act on their beliefs. So this is more on the internal factors based on their attitudes, based on their changing conclusions. I know you do not yet get this at this point, but as we go further, let's try to understand. So there are three parts of learning. There is first is we have significant, second is we have sign, and third we have means and relations. The significant is the goal or the behavior. We ask when we learn what is significant. Why is it important? What is important in here? Why do I do what I do? And then we have the sign, the signal for action. So what must I do if you know the significance of something, you ask yourself, how shall I do it? That is the sign, signal for action. And then means and relations, internal processes and relationships. Sign is how must I do it? And then means and relations is who shall I need or what shall I need in order to achieve it. So, do you get significant answers why? Why should you do it? Sign answers how should you do it? And then means and relations asks who and what do you need in order to achieve it, your goal. Next, there are three key concepts in Edward Tolman's purposive behaviorism. We have map, rather, latent learning, and intervening variables. What are these three? Let's have first cognitive map. An internal cognitive map is an internal perceptual representation of external uh, environmental features and landmarks. For example, Edward Tolman experimented on rats. I have showed you a while ago maps. This one, he experimented here, rats. So he put in here rats and then he gave food to, saan na yun? Here. In his cognitive map, he gave food at every point. For example, here, at this point, you enter here, the mouse enters here, and then he gave food here, and then he gave food here, and then another food here, another food here, another food here, and then another food here. So, yun yung concept. Saan na yun? Cognitive map. That is the cognitive map he did. First, ang ginawa niya, in experiment A, he let the mouse experiment their way up to the end of the maze. And then in the second, for the second, he gave them food. So um, the mouse formed in their minds cognitive map. So even without the food, the mouse can go through the maze even without guide, because they have already put in their mind um, um, the map, the directions. Next, uh, another example is this. When the tunnel to the reward is blocked, the rats follow their mental map and choose the tunnel that leads in the direction where they know the reward to be. So, yun yung sinabi ko. Kahit wala na yung food na nakikita nila, they already know where to go because um, way back, there was a guide. Next, we go to the second, latent learning. What is latent learning? Latent learning is um, a learning which is not apparent to the learner's behavior at the time of learning, but which manifests later when a suitable motivation and circumstances appear. For example, a child always sees during family hour, a child always sees his father or his mother operating the remote control of the TV. And then one time, the father and the mother went out and the children are left with a babysitter. So without the father and the mother who knows how to operate the TV, the child who observes how the TV, the remote control of the television is operated, uh, gets the remote control and operates it himself or herself. Uh, now, latent learning here is manifested. Why? How? The child observes. The child observes, and uh, we do not know. It is not just manifested. It is latent. It is hidden yet. But when the learning is needed, it automatically comes out. So that is latent learning. In teaching, this reminds us of modeling. We just do not know at all times we are being observed by our students. And uh, there will come a time that what we teach them, whatever we do, whatever we do, whether we teach it to them professionally or formally, they learn from us formally and informally. Whatever we do, they model from us, both the parents and the teachers. Next, we have intervening variables. So, um, what is intervening variables? These are variables that are not readily seen but serve as determinants of behavior. So, example, Tolman here did an experiment again with the rats. He did an experiment with the rats. In maze A, he he fed the rats first, and then this is just an example, okay? I don't know if he did this. For example, this is just an example. In maze A, he did an experiment with the rats where um, he fed the rats first before letting them enter into the maze with food as a guide in order for them to be directed to the end of the maze. And then in B, in maze B, he did not feed the rats and before letting them out to the maze. So, of course, which rats arrived at the end of the maze first? Your guess? You're right if you answered letter B, maze B, because the rats are hungry and their hunger serves as the intervening variable. Like in teaching, in learning, if the child wanted so much something, for example, a cell phone, then the parent may say, if you provide me with um, a good proof that you are learning, then I could provide you that cell phone. So intervening variables. How are you going to intervene? What variables intervene with the learning of the children? Um, Another key concept, reinforcement is not essential for learning. This is a conclusion made by Edward Tolman. Reinforcement is not essential for learning. Ano nga ulit ang reinforcement? This is a key question, a surprise question for you. I must see this in your answer sheet. What is reinforcement once again? There are two kinds of reinforcement. What are they and how do they differ? Because we have discussed that in the last module. Surprise question. Okay, I just wanted to read this to you. Education is what survives when what has been learned has been forgotten. That is according to Bruce Frederick Skinner. Again, education is what survives when what has been learned has been forgotten. That's why we have what we say, educated but not learned. There may be people who are highly educated but not learned. When we have forgotten what we have learned, what remains in us are our education. Tama, may degree tayo, we have earned the degree, but because we do not practice what we have learned, then we forget being learned. Next, we move on to Bandura's social learning theory. This is one of my favorite. This is one of the most sensitive theories that teachers must practice and must observe. Why? We'll find out later on. Or I want it to become the second surprise question. Second surprise question. It why is Bandura's social learning theory the most critical theory? I repeat, why is Albert Bandura's social learning theory the most critical theory? Of course, Albert Bandura is born in 1925. He earned his degree in 1949, and then he enrolled in the University of Iowa in 1952, and he finished his postgraduate degrees in 1953. And 1963, he released his experiment with the inflated doll. And then these are his other achievements. He also joined the American Psychological Association, and finally he did his theory, which is the social cognitive learning theory. So, what is learning? Social learning theory. These are the um, these are the general principles in social learning theory. First, people can learn through observation. You see in the picture, what mommy can do, her child can do. This reminds me of the patalastas. Walk like a man. Nung high school kami, meron kasi patalastas na walk like a man, dress like a man, dambi 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 dam. Patalastas ng corned beef. Nakalimutan ko kung anong brand ng corned beef yun. Basta may patalastas na ganun. Sinusuot niya kung anong sinusuot ng daddy niya. Naglalakad siya kung paano maglakad yung daddy niya. Because it supports first. People can learn through observation. It means people are model to children, to little children. Number 2, second principle, learning does not necessarily lead to a change in behavior. A child may be immersed to a certain behavior, but that does not necessarily mean that he will have a changed behavior. You see this. These are what are necessary in order for the modeling to happen. There must be an attention. What is attention? The extent to which we focus on others' behavior. The extent. How extent do we focus our focus on others' behaviors? And then we also have retention. Our ability to retain, the keyword there is retain. Our ability to retain a representation of others' behaviors in memory. For example, we have attended or we have focused we attended or we have focused ourselves on a certain person. Okay, the length of us focusing our attention to that person is called retention. This one. And then we also have production processes. Ano yung production processes? Production processes is our ability to actually perform the actions we observe. We are already beginning to imitate what we see. And then motivation, our need for the actions we witness, their usefulness to us. So, ito na kayo sinasabi ni Bandura sa kanyang second. Learning does not necessarily lead to a change in behavior. We may have been exposed to a certain behavior, but that does not necessarily mean that we will have a changed behavior, because that depends on our motivation. Do we benefit if we change our behavior? What is our benefit if we imitate what we observe? So this all ends in observational learning. There is an acquisition and later performance of behaviors demonstrated by others. Number 3, mental states are important to learning. So, if the mind is active, the more that there is retention, the more that there is attention. If the mind, however, on the other hand, is not active, is in pensive mood rather. Tama ba? Pensive ba? Pensive or in tahimik, or magulo. Then, we expect that there is a lesser attention, there is a lesser attention, there is lesser retention. Now, how do the environment reinforces and punishes modeling? First, the observer is reinforced by the model. So, for example, ako, I am observing what you are doing. So, I am being reinforced by you because I am observing what you are doing. Ibig sabihin, nai-influensyahan mo ako. I am reinforced by you. I am influenced by you, whether I like it or not, because I am observing you. Number 2, the observer is reinforced by third person. Okay. Ako, ino-observe kita. Pero, meron akong nakitang iba So I have compared you and the other person I am observing. So pati din siya, nai-impluwensyahan ako. I am also reinforced by the third person. Okay, number 3, the imitated behavior itself leads to reinforcing consequences. What does this mean? Yung natutularan ko, what I imitate in you, the behavior that I imitate in you, who I observe, I am also reinforcing someone else. So, dito nagkakatulad-tulad yung mga nagkakagaya-gaya yung mga culture. That is why there is cultural diffusion. Kasi for example, I went to a certain place, natularan ko yung ugali nila. Nung pag-uwi ko, inuwi ko yung ugali nila, may nag-observe din sa akin, nakita niyang maganda, tinularan niya ako. So, there is an imitated behavior. And number 4, nako pala, in-explain ko na. There are further explanations to this. Vicarious reinforcement. Sige, ulitin na lang natin. Number 4, vicarious reinforcement. Yung vicarious reinforcement na ito, for example, ay yung inflated doll. But I think there will be explanation here later on. Ay, wala nga. The vicarious reinforcement, for example, in here, ano sabi? Consequences of the model's behavior affect the observer's behavior vicariously. This is known as the vicarious reinforcement. This is where the model is reinforced for a response and then the observer shows an increase in the same response. Yun. You can set a behavior to a certain audience. The behavior that you want your model, your audience to display. For example, Albert Bandura had an experiment with a group of children, two groups of children, where the first group, he exposed them to, he invited them to a theater, and then he presented them with an inflated doll in front of them, and then he presented the doll with, or he dealt the doll aggressively or violently. He punched the doll, inflated doll ito he punched the doll, ano pa, he hit the doll, whatever violence he did to the doll. Hindi lang niya pinaputok. So, pinakita niya yun sa mga bata. And then, group B, wala siyang ginawa sa doll. Pinaupo lang yung mga bata dun sa theater. And then, pinapanood lang niya kung ano yun. Pina-observe lang niya kung ano yung doll na yun. And then, he experimented the children. He asked the children to go to the doll, got the doll and put the doll on a room, and then he asked the children to go to the room one by one, and he observed what the children did to the inflated doll. So, anong ginawa ng mga bata? The children who were exposed to violence with the inflated doll did the same to the doll. They hit the doll, they punched the doll, they kicked it, they used anong tawag nun? They used a pamalo and then pinalo-palo yung doll. Whereas the kids who did not see any violence did not do anything to the doll. So that is vicarious reinforcement. You can reinforce something out of yun, you can reinforce something to your audience. Okay? Now, what are the perspectives of social learning theory? Um, what are the reinforcement and punishment perspectives of social learning theory? First, both reinforcement and punishment have indirect effects on learning, of course. Both reinforcement and punishment. Ano nga ulit yung reinforcement? Dapat nasagot nyo na to. Ano yung reinforcement? Yung reinforcement can either be positive or negative. Yung punishment, ang tingin mo doon ay negative. Okay? They have indirect effects on learning. Number two, reinforcement and punishment influence the extent to which an individual exhibits a behavior that has been learned. For example, reinforcement and punishment influence the extent to which an individual exhibits a behavior that has been learned. Depending on the reinforcement or punishment that you used in order for your learners to display learning, that reinforcement and punishment will influence kung hanggang saan yung ang tawag nito, yung kaya nilang i-display, kung may pagbabago bang makikita, may pagbabago ka bang makikita, affected yun ng reinforcement or punishment na gagawin mo bilang teacher. And then number three, the expectation of reinforcement influences cognitive process that promote learning. So, napaka-importanting mag-reinforce. Napaka-importanting mag-feedback. Feedback sometimes can be negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement siya kapag, wow, ang ganda naman. Keep on, maintain. Nakakatulong yon. It promotes learning. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, bakit naman? Is this already your best? I believe this is not your best. You improve this. Negative reinforcement. Still, it promotes learning. Now, we also have the cognitive factors in social learning. So, ito pala yung na-explain na isa-isa. First one, we have learning without performance. This factor is similar to Tolman. Tolman yung diniscuss natin kanina. Si Tolman's latent learning. Learning without performance. We do not know whether the child learned or not because he does not perform. Pero, for example, yung bata, nahihiya, ayaw niyang magbasa kapag si teacher yung kasama. So, the teacher assumes na hindi marunong magbasa si bata. But when they go home, kaya naman niyang, the mother observed, kaya naman niyang basahin yung, for example, yung label ng toothpaste o kaya yung label ng milk. So, there is latent learning, learning without performance. Natuto yung bata, ayaw lang niyang i-exhibit. Next, number two, cognitive processes during learning. Now, cognitive processing, cognitive processing during learning. Attention in here is a very critical part in learning. Kagaya nga nung nasa na yun kanina, ito. Mental states are important to learning. Very important to learning. Attention. If the mind is active, then you are sure that there is processing cognitively. Cognitive processing. Number three, expectations. Why is this a factor in social learning? When the child knows why he does what he does, the more that there is learning. Diba kaya natin sinasabi na we are doing this kind of activity because or sinasabi natin minsan, it is expected that in this activity, you will learn how to, we are giving them the expectations. Or we ask them sometimes, what do you expect out of this subject? So, this is another factor, cognitive factor in social learning. And then number fourth cognitive factor in social learning is reciprocal causation. Ano to? There are three variables in learning: the person, the behavior, and the environment. So, kung alam mo kung sino yung tao, ano yung behavior ng tao, and the environment kung nasaan siya. For example, kahit napakatalino ng tao, kung ang behavior niya ay hindi maganda or yung behavior ng mga tao sa paligid niya ay hindi maganda, affected ang learning. Or sabihin natin, the person is very intelligent, napakabait din niya, but the environment around him is not so pleasing, affected pa rin ang learning. So, affected ang cognitive ability, cognitive development. So, those are the cognitive factors in social learning. Meron pa palang isa. The fifth one is modeling. So there are three types of model. We have the live model. For example, yung tinitingnan nila na nakikita nila araw-araw, live model. For example, nanay or tatay or teachers or mga titos and titas, the environment around them. And we also have verbal instructional model or yung mga books na nakikita. And then we have symbolic model. We have the television or the radio or cell phones. Yun yung mga from where the child learns socially. Now, what are the educational implications of social learning theory? What are the educational implications of social learning theory? First, students often learn a great deal simply by observing other people. Minsan, kahit hindi nagsasalita ang learner, ang alam natin, wala siyang alam kasi nga hindi siya nagsasalita. We just do not know when the time comes, meron pala siyang alam, nag-o-observe lang siya. Next, describing the consequences of behaviors can effectively increase appropriate behaviors and decrease inappropriate ones. That's why it's very important that we call the attention of the unruly students and explain to them the consequences of their unpleasing behaviors in order for them to be reinforced to do what is appropriate behaviors and to decrease the inappropriate ones. What else? Modeling provides an alternative to shaping for teaching new behaviors. So, that's why I say it's very critical. Teachers and parents are very critical models. By the way, in here, I repeat, these are the educational implications. First, students often learn a great deal simply by observing other people. And the second one, you describe the consequences. Tawagin mo yung mga batang mahirap turuan and describe mo sa kanila kung ano yung result ng mga hindi kaaya-ayang ginagawa nila. And then, to encourage them to do more. Now, question is, first question. This is the first formal question. Meron na akong dalawang secret question. First formal question, why do teachers need to explain why students must do an activity? Why do teachers need to explain why their learners must do an activity? Next, another implications of social learning theory. Modeling provides an alternative to shaping for teaching new behaviors. So, kung may gusto kang ipagawa or sabihin mo sa anak mo na Dapat hindi ka nagsasabi ng mga hindi magagandang salita, pero ikaw naman nagsasalita ng hindi maganda. Mm. Do you expect that there is reinforcement? No. Kasi, in the first place, you should be the model of what you want to impose. Sabihin mo sa anak mo, hindi ka dapat naninigarilyo, pero ikaw naman naninigarilyo. Do you practice what you preach? Okay, what else? Teachers and parents must model appropriate behaviors and take care that they don't model inappropriate ones. Sinasabi mo sa anak mo, hindi ka dapat nakikipag-away, pero ikaw naman, para ka nasa palengke kung makipag-away sa kapitbahay. So, do you model what you want to reinforce? Question number 2. Teachers and parents are both models. Who should be modeling more? Who should be modeling more so that students' learning is ensured? Oh, I repeat, teachers and parents are models. Who should be modeling more so that students' learning is ensured? You support your answer. Second question you. Okay. Next, teachers should expose students to a variety of other models. We have discussed a while ago what are other models. Aside from you, of course, the teacher as the live model, we also have television, cell phones. Diyos ko, napakadelikado ng YouTube bilang model. That's why we must guide them. We expose them, but with guidance. And then, next, students must believe that they are capable of accomplishing school tasks. We must brainwash our learners that they are capable of doing what we want them to do. Because totoo naman, the mind, we will be discussing in the next modules in tawag nito, information processing theory, that the mind is endless. Walang katapusan ang pwedeng matutunan ng mind. The only thing is that we must believe. Next, teachers should help students set realistic expectation for their academic accomplishments. So, nandyan talaga, tingnan nyo yung pinaka-importante ng teachers dito sa social learning theory na to. Teachers should help students set realistic expectations for their academic accomplishments. Kaya huwag kayo magagalit sa mga teachers nyo kapag pinapagalitan kayo na late kayo sa pagpapas ng mga modules or pagpapas ng mga requirements because they just want you to finish what you ought to finish at a particular time at yung time na dapat tapusin kung ano man yung dapat yung tapusin. Next, self-regulation techniques provide effective methods for improving behavior. Self-regulation techniques provide effective methods for improving behavior. Ano yung self-regulation na yun? Dapat may mga rules ka sa sarili mo na sinusunod mo. Okay? That's why teachers provide you with rules. Okay? Bawal akong tawagan ng ganito. O kaya, pag sinabi kong mag-meet tayo ng ganito, dapat nandito kayo. Otherwise, may points na mawawala sa inyo. That is part of self-regulation, training. And then, that is already the end of social learning theory. But I want to add in here this. Okay? IQ is just this. The emotional quotient is this. Ano yung nakikita nyo? Ang talino naman niya, ito yon. Ang galing niyang kaisama, ito yon. And this is the totality of your personality. This does not matter if you do not have this. Napakatalinong tao na yung ugali, ewan ko. So, this is taken from GOLEMAN'S emotional intelligence. EQ. Ano? kung social learning theory is shaping the learner, shaping you both become intelligent intellectually and emotionally. So, third question and the last. Third question and the last. Um, search for the story of, search for a certain story uh, that goes with social learning theory, that explains modeling. Search for a story that goes with social learning theory. So there are 3 questions plus 2 secret questions. You need to watch the whole video in order for you to get and answer them. Good luck and happy learning.